Hello, welcome to another chemistry talk by Dr. Ryan Hayes at Andrews University. We're going to talk a little bit more about nuclear chemistry, some of the power aspects, and getting into other uses besides blowing things up. And what else do we do with nuclear? Oh, we use it for radiometric dating and energy. So we're going to talk about some other uses, medical uses in particular. Some other notes here on the screen about due dates and things that are coming up for my students, so pay attention. If you have a question for all viewers here, look at these power plants here. What is this dangerous looking stuff that's coming out of these smokestacks looking things? What is this smoke? Anybody know? Water vapor, ashes from burning, carbon dioxide, hydrogen and oxygen gases, toxic fumes. What's going on? Well, hopefully you answered water. That's because these are nuclear power plants, and all they are is big steam kettles, tea kettles, just boiling water. And the heat generated from the radioactive materials just boils water. Pretty interesting. All right, nuclear fusion. So in my last talk, we talked about nuclear fission, bombs, energy, things associated with that, lots of side products. That are dangerous. People don't know what to do with. They put them in these cement caskets on site. No state, no place wants to take them. It's a real dangerous environmental issue that someone needs to solve. Surely someone's going to be able to figure out how to reuse these materials. But until then, one of the huge aspects, if people could figure it out, scientists, and there's many of them that are working on it, could we figure out nuclear fusion? Can we take some elements and fuse them? Because you can also generate lots and lots of energy. On the screen, I show deuterium and tritium isotopes of hydrogen. If you can combine them, you can get a lot of energy. And the byproduct is not all these radioactive side products that you get helium. We would have almost unlimited amount of balloons that we could make. Wow, that'd be great. And fusion is such a great reactor that this is what happens in our local star, the sun. So it's possible. We see it every day happening in front of us. How can we do it? It'd be awesome. Lots of energy, little to no waste. It'd be great. There's some huge problems. Coulomb's force is a repulsive force, and it's pushing the protons away. But if you can get everything close enough, a nuclear force will knit it together and pull it together. And it's this combination that gets hard to overcome and sneak something in so that they'll come together. Now, uncontrolled fusion has taken place. This is how the military has developed some really impressive and next level atomic weapons. Is actually tapping into uncontrolled fusion. So doing it in a controlled way is really the issue. So 60 years of trying to do this, no success. So why is it so hard? Why is it so challenging? Those protons need to merge with all the neutrons, and there's such a strong electrostatic force that's pressing them away from each other. You know, it's like putting two magnets together, trying to blow them apart. But if you can just somehow get everything close enough together, there's a nuclear force inside that will bring them all together, and then we release all this energy. So what are they trying to do? Well, you slam them together, huge magnetic forces, lasers, and everybody's trying all sorts of techniques. Some people think they've done it on a tabletop at room temperature, and I don't know. It's just a lot of work. So the current attempt by humanity in some way, it's a multinational endeavor called ITER, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. It's in France. And if their research works out well, we've got, it's not just French, the United States is working there, India, Japan, China, Russia, South Korea, we're all working together trying to get this reactor to work. And they've got this tokamak design, this toroidal design, or spinning things through it and trying to slam them in together. It's going to take a lot of energy. Sounds like a lot of energy to go in, but maybe you can get 10 times as much out. That'd be a great investment. Lots of energy in, way more out. So fusion is the way to go. If this can work, we will solve, energy will not be an issue. But tipping the scales is almost too hard. All right, so let's kind of switch gears here. I'm going to do it by asking a question. Remember this I showed before about the penetrating ability into these different radioactive materials that come ejecting out, the ionizing alpha particles, beta particles, and gamma rays that come out of radioactive materials. And you can see their penetrating ability, but which one is the most damaging? Please think about that. All right, hopefully you've wagered a guess, and hopefully you said, what did you say? Well, let's think about this first. So gamma rays, you want to think of rays, light passing through something, okay? And then that's how we think of gamma rays. And alpha and beta, you want to think of as particles. So which one does the most damage to material? Well, hopefully you picked A, alpha. Most students would not. So this is a tricky question. We have to think about this. Well, think of glass. That's a material. You could think of your skin. That would work too. What about if you shined a flashlight on a window? What would that do? Very little damage. Goes right through it. See, we sort of think if you go right through it, that causes damage. That's not how it works. Alpha particles, they slam into each other. Take a baseball. That's a particle. If you put that through glass, what would that do? Yeah, that would break it. That causes damage. Same with your skin, right? If I shine light on your skin, you're like, oh, maybe you might get a sunburn after a few years. But throw a baseball at you, bruises. Alpha particles cause the most damage. Okay, so think about the effects of a particle versus rays. And then beta is in between because it's a small, really tiny particle. So it will do some damage as well, but it will go through a lot of things. So you can see what in 2017 that most students picked gamma. We just think if you go through something, it causes damage. And I understand that, it makes sense, but there's a lot of things you got to think about when it comes to which one's the most dangerous. So there's a lot of things that scientists think about. It's not just, you know, what do you have there, the source. You got to think about that, but you got to think of how much energy, how many particles are actually coming out of your source. All right, my phone was ringing, so I went and turned it off. So we got to think about how much energy is coming off. How radioactive is the material? What is coming off? Is it one of these alpha particles? Is it one of these beta particles, gamma? They do different amount of damage. And then what kind of tissue is it hitting? And so we think about the ability of these things to do damage and where do they hit. So all these things are thought about. Now, where is the damage occurring? Like not just the tissue, that's part of it, but is it like being breathed in? Is it in your bloodstream? Is it on the outside, inside? Those are some of the big differences we would think of. So it's all important. It's very important to know that this type of radiation is ionizing. What does that mean? Ionizing means damage. It's kicking electrons off, reactions go crazy, and it will damage your DNA, causing cancer and other bad things. So cancer is probably the worst thing, but I mean, it can literally just start, if you get so much radiation, it'll break down your skin, your tissue, you bleed out, it's bad news, okay? So even though alpha particles stop by your dead skin cells on your body, which is amazing, you'd think, why do I need dead skin cells? Well, all those dead skin cells are blocking alpha radiation and alpha particles that are happening all around you. That's amazing. And then a lot of you are looking at this picture on the screen and go, right there, beta, gamma, they're penetrating deep inside. Yeah, that's because if alpha particles got into you and you were breathing them in your lungs, they would just rip it up and you would get lots of damage in there. Beta rays get through your protective skin barrier, start getting in, and they do a little bit of damage, okay? Nice video here summarizing just really all of nuclear chem. I encourage you to watch this. You can look it up. Radiation rays, alpha, beta, gamma. It's a 4-minute video. Go watch that. Nice overview. I found another video on measuring radiation, and we're going to get into it here. But if you want some summaries on that, there's one here. It's like 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Here's a 3.5-minute one on what is a sievert. We're just going to get into these here in this talk. So encourage you guys to go watch some of these others, and I'll post them in Learning Hub. All right. So how do we measure? How do we think about all this damage? Well, first you gotta, as we were saying, where's the source? What's it coming from? How many disintegrations per second? How many curies are coming off? Okay, and then it's really like, how far are you away from that source, I would say. And then there's units for measuring that. So what do you, I mean, you could have something that's very radioactive, but if you're far ways away, the air is blocking it. Woo, another reason to be thankful for the air. And then your skin. And so it's really, kind of distance away. What's the source? How far are you away? What's your actual exposure that's actually hitting your skin? So if you measure something right next to the source, you're going to get a high count, high concentration. But if you measured it a few feet back, the counts go down. So you got source, you got your actual exposure, and then that's hitting your skin, and then how much actually gets into your skin. And these are units like rads or grays. There's a couple of different depending on who's talking about the energy. So joules per kilogram, this is what a rad is, how many energies per mass, your body. And then there is a more functional unit called the rem or the sievert that measures how many the actual damage to your tissue, to biological tissues. So a lot of times when we're talking about nuclear related events and the exposure, it's often in rem or sieverts. Honestly, more in the last few years, I've been seeing sievert. So we'll eventually get to that. Some of my notes are in rads and rems. It's good to know a lot of these. So what is rad? Rad is the radiation absorbed dose. It's really the energy that you are exposed to. Now, if you take the rads and you multiply them by some kind of weighting factor on how damaging the particle is, like alpha particles are very damaging, so they're like 20 times more powerful. So you're going to take rads and multiply them by the rem, or rads by this weighting factor to get rems, the radiation equivalent hitting man. So rem, that's where that comes from. So a lot of things are in rems because that actually measures what you're getting exposed to. But another unit is sieverts. That's really kind of close to that. And you'll see kind of at the bottom of my screen here, I don't know if I can get my pen to work, that measured in sieverts. So 100 millirem, so rem's kind of a pretty small number, and millirem even smaller. So 100 millirem is a sievert. And we'll kind of get to why sievert gets to be pretty popular as a measuring unit. Okay, so there were some old units like curies measuring like how many disintegrations per second are coming off. Becquerels is the international system units. Rads is the energy coming off. Grays is the more popular one I've been seeing, and that's the SI unit. How much is actually hitting you? There's the rems, there's the sievert, and then the unit's energy actually in the air that's sort of backing up to see how much is actually getting to you. And man, I have a hard time pronouncing that name. So I'm going to bypass for now. There's a nice video that says it right. So I think a good one I would keep in mind would be this one sievert is a 100 rem. Kind of tend to see those. See some stuff about grays, like that's kind of the energy that's actually hitting you. So we're going to see some charts now on rems and sieverts. So let's kind of get our minds around that. All right. So what kind of damage and bad things happen based on exposure? Well, 0 to 25 rem, doesn't seem to be too much damage or exposure effects that we see. Now, 26 to 50, there starts to be a decrease in white blood cells. That means you're more likely to get sick. And you can see some of the other changes there. As you get up to 100 rem, significant decrease in white cell blood count. You start to get breaks in the skin called lesions. And over 100, hair falls out. You start feeling really sick. And then over 200 and up to 500, you're going to kill a lot of people pretty quickly. And then over 500 rem, there's death. Now, what is our relative exposure? And you can see in this chart right here, which is in millirem. Okay, that chart was from 0 to 25 rem. So 25. So this is like way smaller. These are like millimeters, really tiny little millirems. So you can see that our natural exposure so if you look at 193 here, or 100% of our total, where do we get exposed to the most? Right here, and that's the the natural sources, the sun, the air, the earth. Now, if you were to put all of the, so here's, this one has about 50% cosmic, and then they would say about 50-50 sun, earth. I'm going to show you some other things that I'm going to flip this in favor of the earth. Very radioactive in space, right? Very radioactive here on earth. Now, if you're older and you get exposed to a lot of x-rays, well, this is going to jump up your exposure. But all of this does not even equal 1 rem. It's the total exposure is 100 and 200 millirem. And that is, so that's like 0.2 rem. So this is in that category that just, we don't really see any effect. Man, that's what we see. And some people think any exposure is bad. Some people think maybe a little exposure might actually be good. So it's really up for debate. Now, this is a recent graph from the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And nice, interesting quote: since the beginning of time, all living creatures have been and are still being exposed to radiation. Nonetheless, most people are not aware of all the natural man-made sources of radiation environment. We just don't feel it. We don't see a lot of the effects. We don't think it happens. We're being exposed all the time, all the time. And here, if you combine our exposure from radon, which is about 55% of our exposure, you add that to the terrestrial sources here from Earth, oh, well over half of our exposure is just the Earth itself. Radon, this gas comes seeping out of the ground, we get exposed to that. You breathe it in, and that gets it in there. Ooh, that's why there's a lot of lung cancer they believe comes from that. 20,000 cases a year or more. So you can see the breakdown, medical x-rays, nuclear medicine, consumer products, cosmic, small part of our overall exposure. People get worried about the fallout that happens. Oof, that's less than 0.3% of our exposure from all those 2,000 or more nuclear explosions. Very little exposure from the fallout of the fallouts. All right. So it's good to know your relative exposure, and we're being exposed all the time. So, 200 millirems, 0.2 per year, this is in the no effect observed. But I would say it's up for debate as well. So I have a bunch of other charts, and you can see them. This one's in the millisieverts, and you can see, what I find interesting is like 2 millisieverts is sort of our exposure for the year. That people tend to, on average, get depending on what part of the Earth. And so I see this, the millisievert, as sort of, hey, 1 millisievert, that's what you're supposed to get in 1 year. So anything more could be damaging. Anything less, not so bad. So this is why maybe people like the millisievert. And there was some right here, Chernobyl and Fukushima. Some workers died because of the radiation that they were exposed to that were in the hundreds of millisievert and even up into the sievert up here, as you can read some of those things here. So it's just interesting to see how our exposure is. Now, this is an interesting chart on radiation dose, and it sort of starts with these blue squares and what you get exposed to every day, and then those all combine into these little green boxes, and then all the exposure that comes from these different things equals a little red box, and all those red boxes into some other things. So there's, go look up the xkd.com/radiation. You see some interesting things about your exposure. All right, what can we use all this for? Are we just to kill things, to power things? There's some really interesting uses. Actually, food and products can be exposed to radiation, and it can kill the bacteria, can kill the germs, can kill the viruses. That could be very important. So if you expose them to gamma rays from cobalt-60 or cesium-137, it'll knock down the pathogens. There's been studies showing that milk, when it's been irradiated, cow's milk, okay, not soy milk, almond's milk, some of that stuff can last a long time, but cow's milk, we know, that doesn't last very long, especially in the open. 3 months shelf life after being exposed to radiation without refrigeration. Amazing. But people are worried because I got exposed, my food got exposed, what did it do? So the long-term studies are still going on these things. The USDA has approved irradiation for some meats and eggs. Many of your products that you use, Band-Aids, are sterilized using gamma rays. And this way you can sterilize things while they're in a package. I mean, how do you sterilize something, put it in the package and keep it sterile? Well, these rays go right through that and they'll kill. So there's a company that specializes in doing that. And that's where I took some of this information from. So amazing. There's some great products that you can do, things you can do with that. Interesting question here coming up. Oh, here's my link to that, isomedics.com/gamma. Okay, so we're going to interrupt our regularly scheduled programming for a quick stability question here. Predict which of the following nuclides is the most stable. Got some calcium, radon, got some tritium, hydrogen there. Whew, is that borium and carbon? How do you pick? Which one would you pick? Pause the video and make your selection. All right, hopefully you picked a calcium. What, you may say? Well, but I thought carbon was really stable. Well, look at the isotope and look at the isotope mass. So 40, that's really close to the mass on the periodic table. Well, why do we have to worry about that? Well, the mass on the periodic table is the sum of all the stable isotopes. So if the mass of your isotope is near that of the mass on the periodic table, it's probably one of the stable ones. So carbon is 12.01. So 11 is a little bit further away than some of these other masses. And anything over 84 is unstable, so that you can't even pick one of those guys, all right? So not even in there. So it's between calcium, tritium, and carbon. All right. Boy, you're just exposed to a lot of the stuff in your food, and it gets in, and you don't even know it. Because radioactive potassium behaves chemically just like non-radioactive potassium. It tastes the same, reacts the same. It's all the same. It's all the same, which is interesting because that means it gets in your food, and if you eat it, it goes through your body. And if you had a way to detect it, because maybe you can detect it, because you can, because these things are particles, radioactive particles are coming off. And if you can have a detector, oh, you can see where it's going. So this naturally occurring isotopes is a way maybe to see where your food's going or where the chemicals that go along with your food are going. And this leads into some of the last uses that I want to talk about in medicine. You see, you can image these isotopes if you have the right detector, and you can see where these isotopes are going. So 99 technetium, this is used to image the thyroid in the brains. Now they have very short half-lives, and this is very important. Key aspect of the technology is they have a short half-life. Why? If it's short, then you can go in, image it, and then it leaves the body. But if it was a long-lived, it'd be sitting there pounding away at your body. So you want short-lived either as it stays in your body, you don't want it to stay very long, or you have a short half-life. And you can see the various things you can image. Your heart, let's get rid of this here. Your heart, your brain, kidneys, all sorts of organs and parts of your body can be imaged with radioisotopes. Now, since they're short-lived, you have to make them on site. You can't just go, okay, here you go, or somewhere nearby. So they have ways of making a dose that's fresh and ready to go really near the site or even on site. Some pretty awesome things to do and to look at. All right, and there's some great tools and videos and things showing how radioisotopes are used for imaging. There's a great video on PET scans, positron emission tomography, and how they work, and I'll put a link to that as well. And let's summarize here. What did we learn? Fusion. Oh, I forget to tap into fusion. Energy unlimited, almost. High price to pay, though, to get into it. We've learned about the health aspects. You can't just think about, well, is it alpha, beta, or gamma? You got to think about what tissue it's hitting, what's your actual exposure, REMS, and Sieverts do that for us. Alpha is the most damaging, so we gotta remember that too. Your body is being damaged, especially in the DNA. And I'm sure other things break down, but that's kind of the most critical one we think about right now, and it causes cancer. Thankfully, your body has multiple ways to repair DNA. Well, DNA is that's great, that's being repaired, and that's what keeps us alive, and why we can be exposed to certain levels for throughout the year. And even though the Earth is the most radioactive place we get exposed to, or we're constantly being repaired for that. And so you can use these radioactive materials for doing some medical work as well. A lot of great things for radioactive materials. Great topic, very interesting. We have just barely scratched the surface. Wish we could go and talk about each one in depth, but for now, that's it. Thanks for spending some time with me talking about nuclear chemistry and its uses and the power behind it and the dangers and how scientists measure and communicate these dangers. So we'll talk to you again, and thanks for joining me.